Welcome to the Public Voice Salon. My name is John Braden. We are an open dialogue on education, the arts, and social change. And we're so delighted to have for the hour today Mr. Richard Sills, who is an educator, a scientist, an inventor. Okay, he was a former educator of the decade of the 1970s. He's a pioneer in using children as teachers, so he exemplifies a kind of progressive teaching style and philosophy. And he's also the author of 4 books, is it, Richard? No, four books, okay. One of them is called A Christmas Story. I thought maybe we could start with that, because this show that we're filming now in the Upper East Side of Manhattan is going to air on Christmas week. So we get to delight our viewers with some Christmas stories. And how did you get the idea for writing a book about Christmas?
Well, it's a retelling of The Night Before Christmas by Clement C. Moore. So I was very impressed, obviously, by that great poem, and so I decided to do a modern version.
And in your version, I think the adults are really at the center, that the adults get to be like children again?
Essentially, the adult takes a voyage with Santa Claus and comes back to his home to find a delightful present that is given by Santa Claus.
I was just thinking, Christmas time sort of brings out the big kid in all of us, and we saw the Christmas tree in your lobby coming in today. And do you have happy memories of Christmas growing up?
Oh, yes. I remember making the trees and the presents and family gathering.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, and so were you going to be, Christmas, are you going to be in New York or are you going to be in Florida? I know you're back and forth between Florida and New York.
I'll be in Florida.
Okay. Okay. Christmas in Florida. So that's only one of 4 books you wrote. Let's sort of begin with your life story, Richard, here, because you grew up in New York, and you are interested in so many different things. One of the problems of our time, I think, today is that so many people are specialists in one thing, and your interests are such a broad purview. You cross over between science and literature, because you've been, the author of 4 books. You are also an inventor. How did you develop educationally, and talk about some experiences in your family and also in school growing up?
Well, I was educated now in Stevenson in New York, which is an elementary school, private school. And then I went to Lawrenceville in New Jersey for 4 years at a prep school. And then I went to Boston University, where I graduated from, getting a BA in English. And I also studied at Columbia Teachers College, New School of Social Research, and Harvard University.
What were the subjects that you studied in college?
Well, in college, I did the gamut from doing business to liberal arts, and I did some pre-med courses in biology and chemistry, so I have a background in that. And I was editor-in-chief of the Boston University Literary and Arts magazine, New Magazine, which I essentially started out as a all-university magazine. Originally, it was just a liberal arts magazine. I made an all-university magazine because there are a whole bunch of different colleges associated with Boston University.
Now, this being the presidential campaign season, Richard, one thing I discovered from doing research on you is that you ran for president under the Children's Party. The Children's, now you announced this down in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club. Talk a little bit about your campaign for president.
Well, it was just a humorous thing. It wasn't serious. But I got some press when I first did it in 1980, when Reagan was running for president, and I got some press mostly at that time. And I had a 6-point program for a more evolved planet that I was pitching that was a little bit tongue-in-cheek. And so at any rate, I had an interesting interview with Associated Press at that time, and it appeared in the Post. I think it posted something on it, and yeah, it was just a flirting with humor. That's all it was.
In a way, it is, but also you got some points across, and I think your career really does exemplify that crossover between science and between education, and also the sort of visionary hopes for a better world. One of the things I loved about your 6-point program for a more evolved humanity is you talk about the need for disarmament and the need to get rid of all the chemical and biological and nuclear weapons. And that I think is something also that Reagan was talking about. Is that true?
Well, I believe Reagan was talking about that, and unfortunately, we have moved in a different direction. But it's a very dangerous world at this time with all these chemical and biological and nuclear weapons available. And of course, ISIS is a very dangerous situation that we have to take care of.
What do you think would be a good strategy for our president and our country in terms of fighting the terrorism? What would be your solution?
Well, I think we have to end it completely. I think we have to treat it like Nazi Germany. I mean, it's a rise of a potentially worldwide situation that they could obtain nuclear and biological and chemical warfare weapons, and they would wreak havoc throughout the world. And unfortunately, they have a whole year to develop their plans until the next president comes in. I hope Trump is able to win, and I hope he's able to catch them in time.
Now, Claudia and I were down in Ocean Grove, New Jersey, visiting my parents who have a house down there, and they have the great auditorium there. And we noticed that one of the speakers there, it's been there like over 100 years, this beautiful, great auditorium. One of the speakers around 1910 was President Taft. And he gave a major address there about the need to abolish warfare, to move beyond warfare. And as crazy as these ideas sound, they were bouncing around 100 years ago. You kind of resurrect that also on your website, the need to move towards peace and love in a spiritual way. And I think just by articulating them, I think that's a very positive thing, just the fact that you did that.
Well, I did that, but nobody paid very much attention to it.
Wow. Well, maybe they'll watch this show now. Maybe because I think we sometimes, as an educator, being an educator myself, it's simply the naming of things. It's the articulation. It's the naming of problems, and it's the posing of radical solutions, even if they seem visionary or pie in the sky. Right now, for example, Ronald Reagan, who you were a supporter of when he became president, we had a Cold War that was raging, and then he saw that movie. What was that movie that was playing that was called The Day After? And it really inspired him, and he said, we have to get rid of nuclear weapons. You have written 2 books that are visionary type books, positing a kind of future, a more peaceful future. Talk about those books. I think, those are 2 interesting books that you wrote.
Well, Lenethros is a book. It's about an alternative universe, though. It's about another universe in which the beings there have evolved, but in order to evolve, a primitive race, a more advanced race, does enact. I shouldn't give away the.
No. You got to get the book. You got to get the book. Okay.
But I'm a humorist, so that's why you're laughing. But but I have a sense of humor about what I say. But at any rate, this more evolved race goes about evolving a very primitive race, not that primitive, but primitive, And that's the story of Lenethros, an alternative universe where it's possible to communicate through peaceful means to evolve and create change.
Let's talk a little bit about your humor, right? Because that's a quality that you have. And I grew up with a very funny mother. My mother was very funny. Now, we're sitting here below a painting of your mom. Maybe, Claudia, you could show the painting of your mom that we're sitting under. Growing up in your family, did you get humor from which side, or from maybe watching TV or any particular comedians?
Well, Johnny Carson comes to mind, but of course Don Rickles and all the great comics of the time had an influence on me.
Yeah, we believe very strongly in that too. We had one of our guests on our show was Pat Cooper, who was friends of Don Rickles and knew Johnny Carson, and that whole time period is very, very fascinating.
Yeah, it was inspiring to me as a watcher of television to see all these great Jack Benny and all these great comics, and I can't remember his name right now. The guy who did Doubtfire.
Oh, Robin Williams.
Robin Williams, yes. Robin Williams, very funny man.
Yeah, that was a great loss. So let's talk also about the man who brought us together, who was Joe Franklin. You were a guest on our show last year when we had Joe Franklin on the panel and yourself, and it's very sadly we lost Joe this year. How long did your relationship go back with Joe Franklin?
Back into the 70s, when I had art exhibits around New York City, in Columbia Teachers College, Macy's, Citibank, actually about 7 or 8 locations around New York City, and Hunter College. The Daily News did a major article on it when I was in Hunter College. But so I went on the Joe Franklin show through Richard Rothman, who was a friend of his and a PR man. And so that was my first experience. And then I did a series of reports on computer technology on Joe's show. I went on his show about 10 times, education, computer science. And so it was a delightful experience to know this great man.
What would you say is about computer science, and what would you say your biggest contribution is to that field? I know you have 5 patents in this. There's something about a thinking computer that you helped to invent. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I developed a security patent on synthesizers. And I developed a analog processing system that can have many uses, including identifying hidden weapons of mass destruction, which the Pentagon refused to do. And and I got a letter from the Jet Propulsion Lab, which I can read to you if you want. But my thinking computer is the most important aspect of it, which never got developed. But, maybe someday someone will pick up on the idea. It's on YouTube, the discussion on how to create a thinking computer. It's under the Shellyn, THESHELYN, or you can look up Richard Sills and you'll see somewhere along there, you'll see a thinking computer under the Shellyn. It also can be found on Thinking Computer, and then, as I said, the Shellyn. It would be interesting to look at. It was broadcast on the Howard Channer show that I did. He took it from the YouTube.
One of the great things about technology is it actually helps us to live our lives in a much easier way. We can spend less time and effort on the difficult work of the past that people had to work long, grueling days, and now we have machines that can do things for us. I happen to be teaching now at NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology, and I think maybe if you want, I could talk to someone, try to get you to give a talk there, because you exemplify the sciences and also the humanities. I'm working working in the humanities department at a science technology school. How did you cross over into these different areas? I'm fascinated by that. What was the original, were you mostly into science in the beginning, or how did you go from education into science and back and forth and then get into literature and writing? How do all those things kind of come together?
Well, in prep school, I took an advanced course in atomic physics. I did very well in my math and the math SATs and everything. So I had a good background in science. And then, as I said, I went into pre-med in Boston University, and I took courses in biology and chemistry. And so I have a background in that. And actually, I started getting interested in doing patents when I observed that they didn't. Actually, the 201 Space Odyssey was the inspiration for my developing a thinking computer. HAL was the computer that thinks, that was guiding the spaceships. And actually, I had on my staff Paul Tassman, who was assistant to the president of IBM for numerous years. And one of the things he informed me about, which I didn't realize, was that HAL is one step up in the alphabet from IBM. HIABLM, IBM.
Now, and when did the teaching career come in? At what point did you decide that you want to be an educator?
Well, I was confronted with the Vietnam War at that time, and I didn't want to run around the jungles killing people, so I decided to teach in Ocean Hill-Brownsville, which was a ghetto in New York City. They call it underprivileged area now. But at any rate, I started teaching elementary, and I found out that the teachers were failing in teaching very simple reading and mathematical skills. So I decided to experiment using children as teachers, and with phenomenal results. I used Dr. Gattegno's system, words and color, and Cuisenaire rods. He called them algebraics eventually, but they're little blocks that children can sort of play around with and do all the mathematical equations through algebra of the blocks.
So in a way, it almost sounds paradoxical. Children as teachers, you think the children are there to learn and you have to instill it in them. But so this is a very progressive concept, that you liberated the student to actually feel empowered to teach others.
Yeah, well, Dr. Gattegno was using that teaching children in his specialized schools. And there are other schools that I think Hunter College, maybe I'm thinking that did use children as teachers. But I went a couple of steps beyond, because I taught children advanced mathematical things, and I gave them advanced knowledge in physics and things like that. And so they started teaching each other art, because I wasn't an artist. I mean, most teachers aren't. And most teachers just put something on the board and tell them to copy it and stuff like that.
Right.
So I just told the children, listen, I'm not an artist, and maybe you can figure it out yourself. So they did it. They figured it out themselves. And they did some phenomenal imagery, which hopefully you're going to include in the taping tonight. Just a few of their phenomenal art that they did, which we had accommodations from, which I was named Educator of the Decade for, and Bob Kane wrote a wonderful treatise on how effective my work was with the children, and so you have to really see this art to believe it.
Bob Kane was the creator of Batman, is that correct?
Yes.
Well, what I love about you, Richard, is you're a very humble man, and you don't boast about your accomplishments. You know, you've renowned in many different fields. You're accomplished in many different fields, and yet you're just very low key, and you're not. There's no braggadocio. You know, there's a humility. So I'll bet your students appreciated that as well.
I can't tell because I was learning so much from them.
Wow. So that very interesting. So now, of course, this art thing sort of blew up at that time, and it became sort of made you a minor celebrity or famous in New York, right? There were articles written about it.
Yeah, and also in Florida, there were articles written about it too. I went on a radio station. I was on NBC, ABC, CBS radio nationally. Newsweek Films did a report on the children teaching children. It gained quite a bit of local publicity, but had some national publicity through radio, but it never really caught on the way it should have, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious also, now you're wearing a Ronald Reagan button here, okay? When did you first become aware of Reagan, and how did that relationship develop with Reagan?
Well, Reagan was kind enough to write a reply back to my 6-point program for a More Evolved Planet. So I got into a conversation with him. He was kind enough to invite me to the inaugural ball. And I just loved the man. He was just a marvelous man. I became the founding sponsor of their Presidential Learning Center at the Ronald Reagan Library and Museum in Simi Valley, California. Yeah. I would advise anybody in that area, or if you go to that area, Simi Valley, it's a fantastic library, and very deep in the history of Ronald Reagan, obviously.
Wow. And you also were involved in the educational aspect of that library. I think you as an educator, that makes sense, right? What was it? What was your part? What was your function in that library?
Well, as I said, I was the founding sponsor of their Presidential Learning Center.
Yes.
Which has courses for young children, and has literally thousands of children going to the library and experiencing their course that they show Reagan, and how they have a specialized course in which they can act as the president or the Secretary of Defense in a war looms situation, which is fantastic.
And as far as before the experience with Reagan, what were your politics before that, and especially in terms of peace and this idea? I mean, it really comes through when you look at your work and you look at the website, and this idea of abolishing warfare. This is something that's not talked about in our media today. Also, you say something critical about our media, where you say that there's too much violence, and you call for a moratorium on violence in the media. Maybe you could mention that.
Well, yes. I mean, it's terrible the way they glorify violence in the media. They cover all these shootings and everything like that, and it just inspires these criminals and these misfits to commit crimes in order to get publicity. But I mean, it's falling on deaf ears because the media is so entrenched in covering violence. But as for war, as I said before, I think we have to destroy ISIS. I mean, we have to go to war against ISIS, just like we had to go to war against Adolf Hitler. I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah, and once we get rid of ISIS, though, what would be, in terms of educationally, how can we create human beings that are more loving and caring? And that's something that we take very seriously on our show. And both Claudia and I are both spiritual people, and we want to use this show to create a different kind of media where people like yourself can come on and say things that sound visionary, but actually ought to be, right? Don't you think? I mean, how can we, as an educator of the decade, what kind of things should we teach students that they could be more loving and kind?
Well, I think we have to go through an evolutionary process. in order for us to come into a positive existence. I think the road to that positive existence is peace through strength. And right now we have war through weakness. And so that's the situation we're in now.
When I was reading your work, I was thinking about H.G. Wells. I was thinking about these great science fiction works of the past, visionary works. Edward Bellamy wrote a book called Looking Backward. All things that they thought were very pie in the sky. And they say science fiction of today is actually the reality of tomorrow. Would you say there's truth in that?
Absolutely. I mean, if you take a look at Star Trek, all these things that they were doing in Star Trek, like the communicator, and now we have cell phones.
Right.
Everywhere, cell phones.
Did you watch Star Trek as a kid?
Of course, yeah.
Oh, wow. I was thinking about maybe if Steven Spielberg could get a copy of Lenethros, maybe he might want to make a movie about it.
I would hope so, but you can never tell if he actually, you can buy these books. You can't get them in bookstores because the bookstores won't carry self-published books. Oh. But you can buy them at Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. Search Richard Sills, and you'll see Lenethros and Antivian and Christmas Story and Tale of Dottie. If you search Richard Sills on those websites.
Now let's talk a little bit about Tale of Dottie. We haven't mentioned that yet. This is a book you wrote for kids about a doll that comes to life. Is that right?
Well, it's a story about a doll who wants to become a little girl, and so she goes into a dream at the bequest of her fairy godmother. And so eventually, I don't want to give out the ending of it, but she eventually goes through experiences that are guided by God to her fulfillment.
It's interesting. Emily Dickinson once said that imagination lights the slow fuse of the possible. It's one of my favorite quotes. Imagination lights the slow fuse of the possible. And there was a great education philosopher named Maxine Greene who was at Teachers College. She just passed away last year. She was 96. She lived a few blocks from here. And she used to say things like, we need to think of things as if they could be otherwise. Think of things as if they could be otherwise. And it's the imagination and the arts that give us that capacity to do that. So I think that's one thing I get from your work is this idea of to dream and to not be afraid to put it on paper and to put it out there. What has been the reaction to your books so far? What have people said about it? Because a good thing about writing is you put it out to the world, but then you get the feedback and you get the commentary. What has been some of the reaction?
Very little.
Well, that's a shame. That's a shame. When you look at the kind of crazy books that are famous today, this is an important point. When you look at a book like 50 Shades of Grey, I mean, come on, becomes a big movie and it's about all this crazy stuff and masochism, sadomasochistic sex. This becomes a #1 best-selling book. We look at a lot of trivial things that are out there that become bestsellers, and we get a guy like you who's writing these beautiful books, visionary books about peace and love and a better world, and we can't get... what's wrong with our media that we're not covering this kind of thing?
Well, they're into violence. But let me show you a copy, a poster on Christmas Story.
The artwork is beautiful in these books. Who did the artwork for you, Richard?
Well, it was done by the people at the book company, Dorrance Publishing. This just to give you an example of how beautiful the art in the Christmas Story is. I'll show you just one beautiful portrait of Santa Claus, if I can find it.
Oh, Santa Claus. Oh, who doesn't love Santa? Oh my God. Oh.
But the artwork in this book is beautiful, and it's beautifully designed, and just another page.
And who are these characters?
This gentleman is the one who takes a voyage with Santa Claus, and his is his wife. So I'm not going to give out the ending of it, but it has something to do with his wife.
And what does Santa mean to you? What is the meaning of Santa Claus?
Well, Santa Claus is a miracle of, to how he can give gifts to all the children of the world. And I think that in the future, in another universe perhaps, Santa Claus will be real, and we'll be able to, and if not meet him, know that he's real in the real sense.
Christmas Eve, we go to my grandmother's house in Fort Lee, New Jersey. She's 95 years old. And one of the highlights of our Christmas Eve is the fire department. The Fort Lee Fire Department has a Santa Claus that goes around on a truck, and they hear the siren. Well, you all run out the house, my grandmother included, like a big kid. And there's Santa, there's Santa. There is a magic to Santa. There is a magic to Christmas, and you bring that out.
Well, thank you for your compliments.
Yeah.
This is the cover of the book, if you want to take a picture of it.
And one of our favorite movies is A Christmas Carol, the version of Scrooge starring Albert Finney that came out in 1970. Claudia and I watch that every year. Do you have favorite Christmas shows or Christmas rituals that you do?
Well, I watched the Charlie Brown Peanuts, the holiday pictures, and I watched the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And I watched Santa Claus, the
Santa Claus is coming to town?
the picture with Tim Allen.
Oh, yes.
I love that series. That's a really beautiful series of pictures about Santa.
We love The Grinch. I like The Grinch That Stole Christmas.
That's great. Jim Carrey. I just watched that recently.
The Jim Carrey one? Well, I like the original cartoon version with Boris Karloff.
That's very good, yes.
Yeah. And Frosty the Snowman is another one of my favorites.
Yeah,
also.
I like that too.
Yeah. Wow, this is beautiful. So, it is a magic that we have to try to bring to the world. And I remember when I started my teaching career, I was a substitute teacher in Hoboken, New Jersey, which also is underprivileged kids, troubled school system. And I would go in as a sub. And somehow, there was this wonder and beauty to the profession itself. That's so. I came up with this phrase that teaching. There's a spiritual aspect to teaching. Would you say that there's a spiritual? Because you reference spirituality throughout your work and the Bible. What would you say for you is the spiritual aspect of education?
I try to quote from my paper on nature of education, which is on my website, lovegod.ws. Nature of education is to learn to love and to love to learn.
Now, I want to just read a little bit from your website here. I brought some notes here, and this is a beautiful quote, and I'm going to read this in the entirety. You say this, okay. Well, first of all, you talk about peace on your website, and there's not too many people talking about peace today. I want to just say that, folks, all right? We watch the news, and we see what's going on, but very, very seldom do you have this idea of how do we get to a peaceful world. We had it in the 60s, remember? In the 60s and 70s, I talk about peace and love. And you say to create peace is to learn from love. To create peace is to learn from love. You also say if we can imagine peace, we can find the solution through communication of ideas to one another. So since we're a show about dialogue, what are your thoughts about communication?
Well, I think communication can work negatively and it can work positively. I think what we're doing now is we're communicating in the negative on television. I mean, you just see all these murders, and and that's what they consider hard news. Me, they consider soft news, so I don't get any coverage.
Well, hopefully we'll turn the tide with this broadcast now, Richard. And this is the quote also I want to read, where you say, the mind going through a rebirth process can have a new perception of the complex nature of existence and growing harmony with that existence, can perceive God as a reality steering his path in a positive way. Thus, the nature of education is a divine process, a process of communication to a higher, happier, and more evolved conception of existence, which, somehow, we all will enter through God's all-knowing, infinite wisdom. As a flower blooms in the spring, the nature of education is to create fulfillment, to love to learn, and to learn to love. That is wonderful. That is wonderful. Why aren't you the Secretary of Education?
I'm too smart.
Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about, you're back and forth between Florida and New York. How much time do you spend in Florida versus, how many trips to New York do you make? Is that a regular part of your
More than 6 months down in Florida.
Okay.
Because I'm a Florida resident. And so I spend about 5.5 months up north. I go back and forth during that 5.5 months.
Can we get you on a national tour with these ideas?
If anybody was interested, I guess.
What would you say is next now? What would you say is your next dream, your next accomplishment in terms of politics, in terms of science, in terms of writing? What's next on the agenda?
Well, I'm writing a book about the creation of a thinking computer. So that's what I'm involved in now.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about this beautiful home that we're in. We're on the Upper East Side of Manhattan on Park Avenue, and it's got just wonderful treasures in it. I'm looking at this beautiful painting by Van Dyck.
Yeah.
And that was your dad's?
My dad bought that, yeah.
Wow. And just beautifully decorated here, wonderful apartment here. And do you have other favorite neighborhoods in the city or places that you like to hang out? What is your New York life like?
Well, I go to Le Ravage, which is a wonderful restaurant in Restaurant Row, and I have a couple of different restaurants that I favor. I go to, like Morton's and Parma, and on the east side it's an Italian restaurant which is fabulous. And then there's a Heidelberg, which has a tremendous German fare. So I have an eclectic love of these restaurants, these particular restaurants that I go to.
Did you ever see the movie My Dinner with Andre?
No, I didn't.
I think you should watch that. I'm getting a sense of that from you now. It's the whole movie, which is starring Wally Shawn and Andre Gregory, takes place in a restaurant. I think it's on the Upper East Side, and they just have a conversation. It's a wonderful dialogue, and Andre Gregory is very visionary in his thoughts and ideas, and he's very interesting and engaging, and it just reminded me a little bit of that. Do you like theater at all?
Yeah, I go to theater. I like the children's theater a lot. I go to the circus, Big Apple Circus most of the time, and which is a terrific circus. Ringing Brothers I go to sometimes, but I'm planning on going to Aladdin. Sometimes I go to a concert at the Philharmonic Hall. New York City is a wealth of experiences for that kind of enjoyment of theater and plays and things like that. Yeah.
So you're obviously a very cultured man, a very, very, very intellectual man, and yet you manage to keep the kid in you alive. How do you do that?
Well, from my experience with the children, they changed me. I became a born-again Christian eventually. So I believe that God has some kind of reason for me to still be hanging around on this planet. So.
Oh, wonderful. What year was that you became a born-again Christian? Or how old were you? What decade were you in?
That was during the late 70s, I think. I became a born-again Christian.
And do you attend?
Early 80s.
Okay, okay. What's your spiritual practice like in terms of going to church or?
Well, I go to church at different times. I generally like to see the Messiah around Christmas time. But I'm not that frequent visitor at church. I went to Norman Vincent Peale's church, of course. That was a phenomenal experience.
Where was that church?
Positive thinking.
Yeah, yes.
Marble Collegian Church. It's on the east side.
Did you get to meet Norman Vincent Peale?
No, I didn't, but I had a letter from him on the nature of education, which he loved. You read an excerpt from The Nature of Education, which I recited amazingly enough. I got it right. I got the ending right.
You have ambition, and a lot of people, I think, in our audience, maybe we could address this issue that a lot of people are very apathetic about the way society is, and they feel like it can't be changed. Things are the way they are, and you can't make a difference. You're the kind of person, and I think all good educators have this, that we are teaching for a better world that might be. How did you get that quality, that idea that things can be different and you could be an agent of change?
Question mark.
Okay, all right. Maybe. Well, was your family very ambitious and active and things like that in the world, or?
Well, my mother was. I can't remember the name of it. It was a long time ago, but she was the chairman of a ball in New York for a drug rehabilitation program. So she was. I come from the Rudin family, which has done a lot for New York City. My mother was a Rudin, and of course Sam Rudin and Louis Rudin are very well known in New York City.
Jack Rudin also?
Of course, Jack. Jack's still alive now, but. The Rudins have done a tremendous amount of good for New York City, and we're very proud of the help that we've given to New York City.
Yeah. Now you talk about drug rehabilitation. This is also something you reference, I notice, that how can we get these young kids off these drugs? I mean, it's really awful. It's terrible. I had a nephew who died of a drug overdose, a terrible, terrible thing, one of the worst things that happened in our family. And but you know, they're seeking these thrills and drugs. And what's your analysis of the drug situation?
Well, I think it's very dangerous. I think that you're gambling. I think that's what Nancy Reagan was saying. Just say no.
Just say no.
But it's very difficult to just say no when you're in a peer group situation. And the question is how you take people off drugs. And I think they have to develop anti-psychotic drugs, which haven't been developed yet, to help take people off drugs.
I think about that movie with Frank Sinatra. Remember the man with the golden arm? Yeah.
It's a terrible situation. And it's done through peer activity. So I'm well acquainted with the power of peer group pressure. And fortunately, as far as I know, the children in my class have kept away from drugs.
Wow.
So, hopefully that's true.
That's a wonderful achievement. Richard, do you ever stay in touch with former students, or?
Well, I'm seeing one of my former students. Take her out for dinner, and she takes me out for dinner too. So it's a very nice relationship.
It's a sacred relationship. It's a sacred relationship, students and teachers. And I'm thinking also about happiness and humor. And you think these are things we can teach for in some way?
Well, I think one of the things I learned from using children as teachers is that young children are capable of doing phenomenal work, and their genius comes out by allowing them to have the freedom to express themselves. And I'd like you to take the time to show some of the artwork that the children did. and you're just be blown away by just seeing this few samples of hundreds of drawings that I have that the children did. I keep on hoping someone in a book company would do a book on it with the introduction from Bob Kane, late Bob Kane, the creator of Batman. But I'm not that optimistic.
Well, we love your, again, to go back to your spirituality and also that we think there's a connection between politics and spirituality in terms of teaching and creating a world that's more loving and caring, which is what Christ wanted, and so we're just hoping to be able to fuse those things in a more positive way and to create a politics that's more that people can actually talk to each other without yelling and screaming and having a civilized discourse. What's your assessment of the breakdown and the polarization in our politics today? The left and the right and all this stuff, nobody seems to be able to get along.
Well, I think we're going through a transition time. I think that we're experiencing energy reversal that ultimately will be positive, and we're in a what I feel or I depict in my graph on scientific proof of the existence of God, that we're in a negative energy field now, in which the negative aspects, you would call it the devil in literature, are dominating. And we're going through an energy reversal. We have to destroy ISIS, and then we can progress in a peace through strength fashion, so that we don't have to use these weapons and eventually get rid of them and evolve into another universe, essentially into a positive universe.
Yeah, it's so terrible that we have to be afraid when we walk out of our houses, that these people that just want to kill for no reason.
Well, their reason is that they know the right way to believe in God, and that their way is to destroy everything that doesn't go along with their apocalyptic vision, and so they have a religious base that something akin to Hitler, that he would take over the whole world, very similar to Hitler, but they're even worse than Hitler in that they want to torture and cut off people's heads and things like that, and publicize it, which Hitler didn't do. So even if he can be possible worse than Hitler, they're worse than Hitler.
So let's try to bring some positive energy. And Claudia, how much time do we have? Oh, Richard wants to show the photographs. Yes. Okay. Yes.
The paintings and drawings. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Good. Richard, maybe you could tell us about this beautiful painting here.
Well, this one was done by Sylvia in her own house. She I think I have another example of. No, I don't have another example of Sylvia's work, but yes, I do.
Beautiful colors.
Let me show you.
Okay.
Was a portrait of a mouse. That Sylvia did. She did these paintings when she was 8 years old.
Oh my God! This is in Oceanville, Brownville.
Oceanville, Brownsville, yeah.
Okay.
I went into the children's houses and was supplying them with materials and stuff like that. And so these were after she worked in my class that she did these two paintings.
Wasn't Bobby Kennedy in that neighborhood also in the war against poverty?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
University of Massachusetts, I brought the children out to the University of Massachusetts for a painting, and I taught them how to swim and stuff like that. It was sort of like a camp-like setting, And this just it's like a Pollock, it's but done by a child. And she was 8 years old when she did that.
So these are artifacts of your teaching life that you continue to treasure all these years.
Yes.
Wow. I hope teachers are watching this and they could learn that you have to celebrate your craft and be proud of the work that you do, that teaching is important work.
Now this was done by Debbie in my class when she was 7 years old. So it's just phenomenal, the creativity of how to just use a few simple colors. And obviously the one eye of God or some kind of beatific vision that she created.
And if that was at Christie's, it would be going for $1 million, right? I mean,
Should be. This was done by Linda, again in my class. And it says, the love for you good. On the bottom.
Isn't that wonderful children who write these little wise little sayings? Wow.
So that they taught each other how to do art. If you can notice, there are different colors in the they did it like a painting with using different color crayons and made it into a painting.
Good old Crayola crayons.
And then there's just regular Crayola crayons.
Wow.
And they used a magic marker. And so it's a phenomenal image. These are so original. You just wouldn't believe that they're done by young children, because mostly in classes the children just copy from the board when the teacher tells them how to do stuff.
And they're taking art out of the classrooms now, Richard. Did you know that? A lot of the teaching now, they're taking away the art. Yeah.
That's terrible.
Yeah. Oh, what about this clown over here I see? Look at the clown. We love clowns. We like to celebrate circuses and clowns and the carnivalesque spirit.
This was done by Debbie again. And I think she did this in her home. I'm not sure, but I think she did it in her home.
Very joyful. And it looks like there's countries involved here, different countries of the world. Is that true? I mean, that's what it kind of looks like to me.
Well, you can imagine what
my interpretation of
it.
Let's get together. Let's be joyful and fun and creative as a world and loving.
Well, it's a clown. It shows how happy the children were at that time working with me.
You brought happiness into their lives.
And they brought happiness into mine.
Wow.
This was done by Alice when she was 6 years old.
Oh.
This is the child that I'm still in touch with now.
Oh. You're going to have dinner with her?
I have dinner with her every once in a while, yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's beautiful. What does she do now, Alice?
She was a secretary. She's out of a job right now.
Okay. This is a beautiful work.
Yeah.
If that was on the wall in a museum, if you went to the MoMA and it said, I don't know, Saul Litsky or one of the modern artists, they would say, okay, that's a work of great art.
Sure.
Oh, my God. It looks like a woman there, very stylish looking.
Little pocketbook, if you notice.
Yes. And the sun is coming out over there on the left. Are these collected somewhere? Is there a book of is this in your book on education?
I couldn't get a publisher, so never got to the public, unfortunately.
But this toured around New York back in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
And Teachers College recognized this, is that correct?
Yes, yeah. It was up in Teachers College for about 2 weeks.
Well, I think this is a good corrective to a lot of the standardization that's happening in our school system today, Richard. And, they are pushing these high-stakes standardized testing, and they're taking the joy and the love out of classrooms. What's your take on that? On the overemphasis on testing and the movement away from creativity?
I don't like it.
Either do we. And so let's hope that people watching this can learn a lesson from it. And, You know, what's interesting about you, Richard, is that you also are a man of science, and we have to teach the sciences as well. So is it possible to be savvy about educating people in the sciences and the arts? How do you do that at the same time, or can you do it?
Well, that's what I did. I gave the children a basic physics and atomic physics and first grade and second grade, which I was teaching, and I let them use these algebraics, which were phenomenal to teach. Creative way of teaching algebra at very low grades, and then I used the words and color charts by Dr. Catania, and then I used older children coming down into my younger children's classes to teach reading, so they all wound up with reading about fifth grade level at least by the time I was finished with them. And one child, for instance, was reading the New York Times, and I was so surprised. I thought he was looking at the pictures, so I said, "Read this." He read the whole thing. I said, "What does it mean?" He told me what it meant. It surprised the hell out of him.
What I love most when I teach is when I open up that space of dialogue, when the students are engaging with each other, and I think that's the kind of work you do also, is to release the creativity in the students. Do you ever give lectures in class?
No.
You like to sort of be in a dialogue?
Well, I was teaching a first and second grade class. You don't give lectures to first.
That's true. With the young kids, that is very true. Well, we are so blessed to have you with us today, Richard Sills, educator, scientist, visionary thinker, man of love and peace. And we are in his brother's Upper East Side apartment on New York City. And
My brother and I are.
Brother and I both own this. Okay.
Yeah.
So God bless you. Have a wonderful Christmas season. You enjoy it. And we're going to have more fun this Christmas, I think, because of your work. And you come back on our show anytime and give us an update on your progress, Richard, okay?
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.